Hello and welcome everybody to the next day of the unique, amazing Java Champions Conference. I'm Ax, I'm a Java champion, and with me I have Sebastian, also a Java champion, who is going to show you amazing things and tell you how to be an effective developer and explain all the principles related. Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks for this introduction. And hi from my side as well. Yes, I'm very happy about this initiative and this Java Champion Conference. Just from Java Champions, I think that's a cool idea, and happy to participate. And yes, in this session, we will talk about some principles of effective developers. So it's not only about Java. I have some Duke with me as well. So it will be about Java as well, but it's also how to be more productive as a developer. And I think that's a very interesting topic because, well, it touches on a lot of things that we might think about as our daily work. But it's not just about some specific, well, tips and tricks and keyboard shortcuts and, favorite features of the best IDE out there, IntelliJ, of course. Although I will show these things in the session, but it's much more about identifying more like timeless principles where if you, well, use any programming language, any tool, you will come up with different issues, but following the same principles. So it will help you. That's at least the idea and my hope. And with this, well, I would like to start showing some, well, principles and things that might be helpful here. So, of course, if you have some questions, just put them into the chat or into the YouTube comments. Live chat, I think it's called. And then I can answer them live. So it should also be a little bit interactive. About myself, well, I'm a Java champion and a lot of Java titles here involved. So I'm a freelancer. And I do a lot of things with Java and enterprise software in general, but also this topic on how to be more productive. And I help my clients in workshop and consultancy, well, getting better at what they're doing. So if there's anything that you find interesting here, as always, feel free to reach me out. I'm happy to help you or your team in some consultancy engagement or workshop or whatever it would be required. But now let's start with this session about principles of effective developers. So what I would like to start out with is this thing of, well, embracing automation. So if we think about using the computer, this is really an important one because I think it's somewhat it means using the computer in the right way, because we can, well, identify certain tasks and things that we humans are better and certain things that the computer is better. And nowadays, that's really interesting because we have, AI coming up, and I'm pretty sure you heard about ChatGPT and maybe even tried it. And the line gets more blurry of what, well, constitutes a task that can be automated and what needs our own creativity or complex thinking. But I would say there are still certain things that we are just better as humans, and it might be complex understanding, it might be proofreading of some AI generated text, and some that the computer can do. And well, if we already switch over to our IDE, for example, this is already something that can help us here a lot, because if we think of automation, it's not just, some very big task, something like, a pipeline constructing things, or a robot running around building cars or something like that. It can be also really small things, any shortcut, any feature that you use. And that's quite interesting because if I think, well, here, what do I have? I have my IntelliJ with some class, but of course this Java class, well, I didn't create that, right? So that would be rather cumbersome, right? So if I would go and write package, my name, test project, public class, hello, of course, that wasn't the case, so I just generated some code here. If you think about it, that's already some form of automation, right? In the same way, if I do this, if I say, well, just please create some main method, what is called a live template here. So these live templates can create things in IntelliJ, or of course, hello world, something like this, that just uses some sort of automation. And this already is automation if we think about it. And now, where I would like to draw the distinction, and this really then doesn't matter which programming language or IDE you use. If you say, for example, you have something like a method that does this or does that, and then I would say, well, if I would like to outsource this in another method, we can do this. So do this and that, for instance. And if I say I have this method here twice, well, I could rename this method. That's already some refactoring action. Now, if you think about it, all of these small steps that I've just done are an example of automation. Now, if I go and say, okay, let's rename this method, right? So if I would go and say, well, I would like to rename this to renamed, do this and that, well, of course, you see this doesn't really make sense, because then I get a compilation error and I would need to do all of this manually until it works again, right? So obviously you wouldn't do this, at least not if you have some basic IDE skills. And we all know that this doesn't really make sense to do things manually if you have an IDE automation feature for that, right? So for example, you could say, well, right-click, refactor, rename, and then rename it back, for instance. Okay, so now that's already interesting to think about for a second. Why? Because there is the distinction here of, well, basically considering and thinking about what would be a good name for that method. And I think this is some work that really makes sense to be performed by us humans. That's not trivial. Well, of course, this method is trivial, but if you have a more complex project, these names are really important. And to find a name that communicates the intentions really well of the method or the class is, sensible work. But then doing the actual renaming action, going through all of our code files and searching and replacing, well, of course, we should use some automation for it. And this is something where it would make the distinction. So it's totally fine if we say we spend 5 minutes thinking about the best name for this method, but then renaming it should be a matter of a few seconds. So of course, if you say, well, I would like to use an automation, and I will show you some other examples for this as well, then typically what you would like to do is to say, well, whatever you would like to do, there's probably a shortcut for that, right? So that's, if you think about it, another form of automation, because instead of saying, well, right-click, refactor, rename, this takes a while and I have to use my mouse. And if you're, a power user of IntelliJ, you don't like mice. You don't want to use your mouse. So, let's put the mouse away. You can, hide it in a locker or something. If it's a wireless mouse, that's a good idea. Then you have to use the keyboard. So instead, what I would like to do, well, I would like to use a refactoring action. For example, Shift F6. So that's just, renaming a method. So of course, there is a shortcut for that in order to trigger this in a little bit easier way. And then I can say, well, this should be the renamed version of it. And renaming then is easy. Well, of course, in the same way, I can inline these methods again, Control-Alt-M, Control-Alt-N, in the same way like Control-Alt-M for, the Windows and Linux key map, actually created the method in the first place. And then, of course, because our IDE is very intelligent, it asks us, actually, do you like to have the second invocation as well? So would you like to replace that as well? Okay, so this is just a very basic example, but if we think about it, okay, there's the separation of certain tasks that really makes sense to be performed by us humans, more complex thinking, and something that can be automated. So this is, of course, something, then all sorts of live templates. I already showed the basic ones. There are really cool live templates out there. If we say you have a string, and it's also possible to have what is called a postfix notation. So that's more about how you type. You type some variable dot, and then you would need something that can be wrapped or needs to be wrapped, actually. So you write something that would not really be a method or that's not valid Java, but IntelliJ can do this for these things. Well, obviously, you can also define your own ones. So for example, if you say, well, I would like to have something like a post-construct method that now doesn't work because I didn't include the dependencies. Let's do this real quick. This is an old one, but it doesn't matter, it works as well, because I just have a live template for that as well. So if I say, well, I would like to create this method, or something like @inject or @autowide if you're using Spring, right? So what am I doing here? I defined my own live templates for these sort of boilerplate snippets, and that not only include, in this case, @inject, but they also include the import, right? Because otherwise, what you do, you type @inject, and you saw I did a typo, and then you have to select the correct import, and that always takes away 1-2 seconds and some mental energy. So it's just less friction if you say you have live templates for the things that you use a lot. And that's basically same story, automation yet again. So you use an automation where otherwise you would have to do things manually. Let me real quick go into the YouTube section here, and now you hear me twice for a second. So let's mute this so I see the chat here as well. Okay, so if you have some questions, let me quickly type hello here in the chat as well on YouTube or wherever you're watching this. Then feel free to put something in here. You can also write from where you're watching. That's also always interesting to hear. And then let's continue. So again, if you use some tool like your IDE, there's probably a shortcut from some sort of automation that makes the things easier. How I see this is basically using these tools that you use all the time as a power user. Really get more familiar with these tools because it helps you a lot. Like all of these features and small actions that you use all the time, once you get used to the automation features of your IDE, once you get used to the shortcuts, this really makes your life easier. And then, of course, we should use we should use the command line. That's another thing that I really, really encourage you because, well, especially if you use some sort of Unix system, the Unix command line is really powerful. This one here. If we say, well, especially on a Linux system, you can do pretty much anything that the computer can do while you are in the command line or by using the command line. So typically, as a Java developer, we do something like Maven, clean install or Maven clean package or Maven clean package, I don't know, and skip the tests, right? Like something like this. That's what we invoke all the time. So really, one of the easiest ways to improve your productivity here is to define some aliases. So you can define aliases for the most common things that you do all the time. For example, well, Maven clean package, right? Or Maven clean package and skip the tests. Or even better, Maven skip a clean package and Maven test skip. The difference is the second one doesn't even compile the tests, right? So if you ever have a legacy project where even the test failed to compile, you can have the last command and then, everything just builds. It basically says, yeah, don't care, YOLO, just build. And with this, if you define aliases for these, it really makes your life easier because things you type all the time, that's just easier. In the same way, if you say, well, you type Docker PS all the time, or of course, Git status, or Git commit, or whatever have you, right? Git commit with a message, Git push, and things like that. It's just so much faster to type these. Git, for instance, also allows you to define aliases itself. So you could have something like this for status, but I think it's even faster to just have yet shorter aliases on your command line, and then, well, you can execute this here in that way. So that's really one of the best features, even if you don't use the command line a lot, because it makes it so much easier. And it's not just about being faster, it's less mental energy, because how many times do you have typos, right? Like when typing Maven clean package, you see Maven clean package, it just takes too much. If you do this, it's much faster, and even faster than searching, I would say. So that's one thing. And then, of course, in the same way, there is probably a shortcut in order to improve what you're doing there. So also on a command line. So I would see these command line aliases a little bit similar to what you have with live templates in your IDE. And then the shortcuts a little bit more like what you have with shortcuts in your IDE, such as, well, rename method or insert generate code or something like that. In a command line that works as well. What I mean with this is, do you know this command, clear? Well, it clears the window. There's also one available. You see my keyboard down here, Control L does the same thing. It just clears, in the same way like Control C just cancels or terminates the current command, and this clears it, right? So in the same way, it really makes sense to have a command, something like, well, ls or ls with list or something like this. So I defined Control K, that clears and just displays the current directory. That is not a standard. I defined this for my Z shell. You find my material at the end where you can do this yourself. But it's just so obvious, if you think about it, because you do this all the time. You list some current directory. Maybe you can list this also Control J with some hierarchy like a tree, or Control H with a tree with more depth, more levels. It really makes sense because then you're just so much faster. So navigating the command line and in general your computer should feel much more like a video game, right? Like it should feel seamless. You just should navigate around and press some keys, and there you are. You shouldn't spend time, and you certainly shouldn't use your mouse. So with this, you can be much faster with your command line usage. So that's one thing, to define your own shortcuts. And then, the more you use it, the more you will get used to some features. So for example, you could say, well, I would like to rename some file, with this. And then maybe I would like to prepend the current date. So I have another shortcut for that, Control T, for displaying the current file, the current date. And with this, you can move this in that way. Oops, that's actually the other way around. Like that. And then you can just rename real quick a file. That's actually what I do when I have some, let's do this again. When I deal with some PDF documents, like taxes and things like that, I use this on the command line all the time. I don't even use a file explorer anymore. It's no joke. I use the command line pretty much for everything. And the more you get used to it, the faster it will be. Same for command line navigation and things that you can do in this Z shell command line. That's really cool. But I have some more material out there. Unfortunately, we only have 45 minutes today, where you can check this out. But just in general, using the command line really helps you to, just increase the automation and the usage of the automation on your system, because there's so many cool things that you can do on the command line, especially as a developer. If you have some sort of API that you use, if you have some sort of JSON and you need to handle that, and using data, you can use pipes in the command line. So for example, if you say, well, I have this test JSON that comes actually from an API, then I have something like this. So I can display this here, and then I have the possibility to pipe to, pretty print that, or to extract this value here, or to take this further to do something like, let's remove the quotes and then base64 encoded and things like that, right? So you can do whatever here by just, using the command line, using these Unix commands or your own shell scripts to do automation. Especially shell scripts is also a big one, because shell scripts is basically just one of the best ways how to use automation with your computer, because it's very simple once you get used to the command line. It's basically just taking these commands, putting it into a file, make it executable, this plain text file, and there you go. Then you have a shell script. That's basically it. And with this, you can do a lot of things, especially just making your life easier. If you have your project, if you say, let's do this for a second, build. If I would say, let's see, another script, another automation. If I would say, for example, build the project here and then do something like a Docker build for your image, and then, have something like a Docker run, something like this, right? That's what we do all the time, and whatever have you. That's basically it. Save that file, make it executable, and there you go. Then you can execute it. Okay, so what does it bring you? Well, it brings you a lot, because with this automation, when I'm executing this here, obviously it doesn't work. I can just lean back and sip my coffee, because the computer is building it. And that's a big one. So, use the command line a little bit more. It's really, really fun. Again, if you have some questions here in the chat, then okay, there are some questions. I was just seeing with the streaming solution, it doesn't display them, but no worries, I can look at YouTube. So hello from Serbia, very cool. Hello from my home office basement. Yeah, I'm also from my home office, Austria. Hello from Mexico, hola. Aliases are nice, but if you are on a remote machine, you don't have them, or do you anything portable? Kind of. I have a .files directory that I can show. So That's actually also on GitHub, which you can check out. And I use a similar thing with a repository. It's literally a Git repository. And here you already see the aliases file. And the most important files are there. And then there's some install routine somewhere, which you can just take, and then, well, it downloads it and installs them typically with a symlink in your home directory. So this works pretty well. Of course, if you would have a super new machine all the time, like every day a new machine, then it's a little bit more cumbersome. But even then, you can have some automation. Basically, have something like a package that you zip up, that you extract once, it installs itself, and then you get your typical environment. So I would really recommend that. As a matter of fact, this is what I'm doing on my servers. So sometimes I'm still managing a server for myself, and then that's the same thing to just get that environment basically. And yes, the question was, is Control R reverse search your friends? Kind of. I use this a lot. So what this means is basically Control R and then something like Maven, and what I just executed before. So this was Maven Verify. Actually, if I would say Maven Clean Package fails here, of course, because it's not a Maven project. But if I would now search for Maven, then it displays this. Kind of. I do this only with commands that I very seldomly use, where I say, okay, I remember this, or it was a specific command. But actually, for things that you do all the time, I would recommend aliases more. Why? Because if it's something like, Maven Clean Package, then if you would say, okay, last time I did this, or this time I need this, skip tests, right? And if I execute that, and then the next time, oh, just Maven Clean Package, oops, this was the wrong one, right? So I had this a few times where you think the search will yield some result and you press enter too quickly. This can be a little bit dangerous. So what I like with aliases, if it's a command that you do all the time, it's more predictable, because you just know, okay, this is going to be the command, execute. So kind of. I use it, of course, a lot. So just the possibility to search is helpful, but depends a little bit. Hello to India. Is there any way to automate POM project version? Like after Maven Clean install, automate POM project version? Yes, there is. For the project version, well, it depends a little bit with the Maven. Yes, so it's already in the answer in the chat. Maven release plugin. This is the Maven way, the official way how to do this. And the release plugin will also actually change your POM XML and then update it to the right version. Maven release is always a little bit of black magic, so it depends what is the best way. Actually, I have a counter example on the command line. So, for example, this is not your specific question, but with generating an archetype. So what I have a script that creates a new Java project or a new Quarkus project that doesn't use an archetype. It's just basically a bash script that creates some files because it's faster for me. So it depends a little bit. Sometimes creating your own scripts can be easier, but for the automation perspective, search for Maven release plugin. This does change the version like how you want it to. So that's the answer for that. Okay, perfect. If you have some more command line questions, keep them coming. Command line things is always super fun for me, and I think it's very much of an important topic. Okay, what else is there for principles of effective developers? So the first one we probably identified, it means embrace automation. You will find in general a lot of big forums and small forums where you can automate something. And the thing what I want to teach you or inspire you is to just keep your eyes open for things that you can automate, because you can literally automate anything. And I mean anything. Even if you have to use your mouse or something, there's an automation even to use your mouse. There are Selenium and Selenide tests to automate website usage. I've used this as well, like no joke. And there's always an easier way around, even for simple things such as starting up your browser every morning, right? Like if you say, okay, I always open up the same tabs in the morning. So my inboxes, for me, that's usually my Gmail client and Twitter and whatever. Just have a script that opens this up, and then you have these multiple tabs, and there you go. Or something like I have this session. something like a development session for, coding on some project that then just opens up several things in, in your IDE windows and all of the tabs and workspaces, how you want to do it all the time. So basically when you say, in the morning, I always open up the same things here. I have my tabs here, my browser on the first workspace, and then all of the other things. Well, just automate it, right? There's always a way to do this. Build scripts I already talked about, but basically, there's so many things that you can automate, and I hope I can give you some inspiration to just, make your life easier for that, because anything that doesn't require your complex thinking, anything that is a repetitive task, pretty much can be automated here. Okay, for the next principle here, that is to minimize context switches. And context switches really is very similar to CPU context switches and the penalty they have to pay when switching from doing one thing to another. But also context switches here come in big forms as well as small forms for humans. We humans, we also suffer big times from context switches, especially when we're distracted. But I don't even mean this yet. That will come a little bit later. But also when we do small things, especially if we change, from using the keyboard to using the mouse. And that's a big one as well. So that means, as a tip, spend more time on the keyboard. Okay, why? There's actually a reason for that. And the reason is not just, a nerdy reason to say, okay, the keyboard is cooler than the mouse. No, it really makes sense. Why? Because of, your hand movements, basically. So if you have a look at your keyboard, if you have one in front of you, typically, you should place your hands on the home row, that is F and J, and leave them there. Because every time when you switch around, that is some sort of friction. And I would say even a small context switch, because this breaks your flow. So if I'm, coding away here, and then I say, oh, now I need to grab my mouse, you didn't see it, but I changed my hand position in order to say, well, file, new, whatever, class or something like this. Or I go to my file explorer and say, well, right click, new Java class. It just breaks the flow here because I need to, change my hand position. Typically, I need to look down or something like that. Where am I? And that doesn't really make sense. So in general, it makes more sense to stay on the keyboard. Do you always have to use your keyboard? No, it depends. So for example, if I'm using a website, well, then typically your mouse is just faster because the actions aren't that predictable, right? Because I need to maybe click here, click there. I need to explore. I need to, look what is on the website. But if it's predictable actions, especially using your IDE, typing along, because, you only have so many letters in the alphabet, or pressing an action like saying, okay, run this, or, refactor or something. These are limited set of actions. And for that, it really makes sense to stay on the keyboard and to be, seamless with that. So this really makes sense. And that's another reason why I am a big fan of this. Well, not really the editor, but the way of typing, Vim, and the Vim way of typing. So you probably have noticed this in my IDE. I have a weird movement here with this, fat cursor that is not really default. Well, I use the Idea Vim plugin. Why? Because this Vim way of typing makes a little bit more sense to reduce these context switches. This is really what I like about this. What does this mean? Well, basically on your keyboard, if you would need to move around the cursor, you would need to switch to, your cursor arrows, right? Like this one. You see the difference here down there, what I'm pressing. But now I can press, K, J, and so on and so forth. How this works is, you have multiple modes here, which is also the confusing thing of Vim. So, you need to press a special character like I for insert in order to be able to type something. And then you're in what is called normal mode, and you can move around and, change text and things like that. And it's just super fast once you get used to it. So that's actually the reason why this is so fast. It is because it reduces the context switches. I don't have to switch my hand position from typing to where are the cursor arrows, typically look down, and then press them and then switch them back. If you're practice, sometimes you can do this without looking, but basically you will be slower compared to if your hands stay on the keyboard, if your hands stay on the home row, F and J. And that's basically what this Vim environment does, and why a lot of developers love this Vim way of typing, or VI mode. I do the same in my command line. I have this VI mode available. So if I press escape, then it's the same thing. Up and down, that's easy. But what is really cool, if I say, well, I would like to change this to, something else. I would like to replace some text, for example. So these Vim movements and then also Vim actions that you have, like, replace some text, delete some text, so on and so forth. It's really fast. And I also use this, well, for all my writing. I wrote my book in Vim. I write pretty much everything in such an environment, not just Vim, but you see also my IntelliJ has that, but I need this environment in order to type faster. And the reason for that is basically this way of typing that reduces the friction, that reduces these context switches, from moving your hands around. So this really, really makes sense here. So question in the chat, I just hopped in, were Git aliases covered? Yes. There were. So maybe later you can, scroll back in the video. It will be recorded. It will stay there, and you can check this out. Or at the end, I will point you to much more material. You can also have a look there. I think that's interesting. Another question: if I do something, MV tab, select file, destination, location. Now I find I've mistakenly selected wrong file. How do you select some other file using tab? Once you confirmed a file with tab, I think you mean the following. If you say something like move and then test.json, and if I say tab here, you cannot go back because then it's already selecting the second one. Once you did this with tab, you cannot go back. This only works if you say, if I have a file te.json and then I say this, and then it alters the selection. But once you selected one, then you cannot go back. That's another reason why I like this VI mode of working here, because then I typically press quickly escape, go back, and change. So that's then just faster rather than Control C and doing this again. So if you mistakenly selected the wrong one, I typically say, okay, jump back or something like this, and then select the right one. So good question, actually. So with this, I think this VI mode in your shell also helps, once you get used to this way of typing. Kirk, hello. Nice to see you in the chat. There's a time dilation effect when you don't realize how long it takes to switch modes. From, well, which modes are you talking about? Can you elaborate? You mean when you don't realize? You mean if you're actually already distracted by these context switches and you should notice it much earlier? I mean, yes, when you get used to basically working in a sort of slower fashion, or when you're switching these contexts, or have waiting times a lot, and basically people are used to it, yes, then sometimes they just don't see it until they actually watch a colleague who works in a faster way and realize how quickly things can be. So yes. Between mouse and keyboard, yeah, same, absolutely. So I think it's sometimes even sad that people don't realize when they say, okay, I can quickly do this in the mouse. Yes, you can, but actually, maybe you shouldn't. Or if you would watch somebody who doesn't have that switching cost here, or who doesn't need that extra time, then this is just much, much faster. So this totally. So I just encourage everybody to stay as much on the keyboard as possible. And again, keyboard versus mouse, it depends. If you say you're a video editor, you would need the mouse all the time. Then of course, maybe you have one hand on the keyboard and one on the mouse, and use the shortcuts on the left and have a layout here. But what I'm saying is don't switch all the time, because that will make you slower. And yeah, that's basically the takeaway there. All right, so next thing, don't wait. Don't wait, and don't make me wait. That's a really big one, and I cannot overstate how important that is. Why? Well, because we're human beings, we get bored, especially my generation. I'm a millennial, and I'm said to be really, really impatient, our generation, and we want instant gratification and instant feedback. And actually, it's true. And there's a whole science towards this flow experience, and for saying what constitutes, a flow experience and staying in this flow mode, a little bit like, a computer game. Well, one thing is to have immediate feedback. And this really means a lot of things, basically, well, anything that gives you feedback here from this regard. And the obvious one is to say, well, I do something, and then I would like to see if it works. Something like I write a test. So for this, I want to show you, well, Quarkus, of course. So maybe you expect this when it comes to enterprise software and all of these development modes. When you say, well, this Quarkus technology offers basically one of the best development mode for enterprise Java developers out there. And what I can do is to say, well, I would like to start up my project with this Quarkus dev mode, and I'm pretty sure you've seen such a thing. And the reason why I'm such a big fan of it is the following. If I say, well, if I open up my, coffee example that says just coffee, I can just have the application running all the time, and it will just, change something. So I can say, well, coffee exclamation mark. I'm pretty sure you've seen something like this, and it immediately changes it. Well, how does it work with a quite modern way of having code recompilation and having a very nice build time optimization for the applications here? And this works really, really well with the development mode integration. But the point is really, it doesn't make you wait. And it's not just about, having some refresh here. So this also works in the browser, right? So it's not just a code level, it's the running application. And here you will see that it quickly restarted in the log. But instead, it also works with the test integrations and even, integrative tests, like system tests that connect to your application. So what it means, if I toggle the test output here, if I say I can run the test, and now already the test fails. So there's what is called a continuous testing approach. What it does, it says, well, it runs this test, coffee shop test, and it expects that the string is, well, coffee and not coffee exclamation mark. So if I would go to this test and say, well, it now just failed. So I very quickly have this, let's do this again, let's fix it again. And, even faster than I could switch over, it's already green. So I can run it again. You see how quickly you hear my keyboard, how quickly this works. It even works faster than your IDE. You get instant feedback, basically, because it keeps it compiled in the background. And now if I change this again, now it says, okay, it's immediately red because this test now fails. And then I say, okay, now I need to update the test, right? So now it's green again. And the same is true actually for integrative tests. So I can also have this with tests that connect to that, what I have here. So that's really, really helpful. And well, it just gives you instant feedback. The reason why this is so important is just we get distracted and bored basically so easily, right? So if you have something like, a sleeping time or a waiting time of 1 second, then it's like done, right? So done. So it's kind of okay. You don't even move your hands off the keyboard. It's basically just, like a synchronous wait. It's like a synchronous blocking call. You just wait for it. 2 seconds, done. It's also okay. But then once you have something like 10 seconds, now we can wait together in real time, but basically you see what happens. Well, of course you get distracted, right? You pull out your phone, you check social media, you look at your emails and things like that, and then your attention is elsewhere. And this happens very often for, well, integrative tests or any build pipeline that just takes so long while coding locally. So for local development workflows, it's paramount to say, don't make me wait. Like really just give me instant feedback. And with modern Java frameworks, this is really possible. Your IDE support a lot of things. Well, for a long time, there has been this JRebel around. Quarkus dev mode is really, really powerful. You can build up even something with integrative tests. I have some material on my YouTube channel about that as well. And it's really helpful because you can come up with a local development workflow that really doesn't make you work. Wait, well, it doesn't make you work. It makes you work much better because you're not waiting, because you don't spend that time waiting. So it doesn't slow you down. It's really much more fun. You're not wasting time. It's just like bang, bang, bang. You always have an update here. And that's really, really helpful. All right. So let's quickly look into the chat. Do you think it's worth to use Vim and IntelliJ as learning curve is a bit curvy? Well, if you want to give Vim a try, I would really recommend to have it in all the environments because otherwise, you use it only in Vim and then in IntelliJ, it doesn't work again. So you would need to use it everywhere where you typically type on your working day. For me, it took like 2 weeks to basically get to the same speed as without Vim because it can be a little bit clunky in the beginning. But then afterwards, you basically, save time, as I would say. So I would say it's totally worth to check it out. But if so, then in as many environments as possible. totally worth it. Yes, I agree. So a lot of Vim fans in the chat. That's cool. All right. And then, well, next topic is basically manage distractions. So that is a bigger topic for anything that, well, regards working productively. Why? Because we're knowledge workers and we really need to be able to focus. So any sort of distraction is really bad. A distraction can be, well, all sorts of things. I mean, obviously, if you work in an office, then it can be a coworker. If you work from home, it can be, family, spouse, kids, whatever have you around, or pets, anything that constitutes a distraction from working. Of course, notifications are really bad. Your phone is a huge distraction. And what I can just tell you, of course, life circumstances are always a little bit different, but try to manage them or eliminate them as much as possible, at least for some amount of time. When you say, okay, you can look at when in the day you are the most productive, especially if you're working from home, if you have some flexibility, is to say, okay, when can I carve out some time in which I can really focus? For a lot of people, that's in the morning, for me as well. And, you can just arrange yourself and often your life circumstances or whatever have you, just in a way that, you're not distracted that much. And over time, you also learn what constitutes a distraction for you. So, for example, I'm distracted a lot by noises. So, noise canceling headphones or earplugs help a lot. You might be distracted by visual noise, somebody walking around behind you. So, trying to blend that out or place yourself somewhere where that is not an issue, things like that. So just trying to eliminate these distractions, because while focusing, that's really bad. So if you're new to this sort of topic, what I can really recommend, turn off all notifications, all email, Slack, communication channels, at least for some time, especially if you set yourself a timer. And if you say, I'm going to disappear for 30 minutes or 60 minutes, usually it's totally fine in the teams to go back afterwards. If somebody has some urgent message, to say, well, I'll get back to you within 60 minutes or something like that. But until then, you're offline and you're just fully focused on whatever you need to do. Otherwise, that's unmanageable. So, and it's really an important point. In general, if you find this topic of efficiency interesting, what I also want to point out, my setup works is an on-demand video course that I have on this topic. So that is called Masterclass in Developer Productivity. It is available just online. That's on demand. You can enroll in that course whenever you like. So, of course, after the session, please watch to the end. But this course is more than 14 hours of video material of me talking and showing stuff. So, of course, that shows much more than I could in 45 minutes. And also what I implemented there last year, because I thought that was nice, is what is called a purchasing parity program. So Purchasing Power Parity, that's the name. Because it's available online worldwide, and if you happen to be in a country with, well, typically a lower income compared to other countries, then there is a big discount there. So that's somewhat factored in. I thought that's, well, fair, or to balance this out a little bit and to have a more reasonable price for everybody. Where if you're located in such a country, then it will be definitely much cheaper for you. Also, well, hope that folks are just honest. I mean, you could use some VPN or whatever, but just if you happen to be in a country, then the price will be a little bit less. So you definitely can check this out, Developer Productivity Masterclass. At the end, I will give you a link and also some more material there. But for now, let's move on with the topics here. Let's have a quick look into the chat again. Block it out in your calendar, yes. And read the programmer's brain. Well, Kirk mentioned a very good topic in the chat, own your time, as I would call it. So that's basically trying to, block out some time. Because I think we developers agree that nothing is worse than a day with just a lot of meeting blocks, like 10 a.m., a meeting of 1 hour, and then 12 a.m., a meeting of 1 hour. Then in the hour, of time in between, you will get nothing done. So own your time basically means try to have an understanding when you are the most productive. I mean, obviously not always will that work, depends on your situation, but very often it does. And then for you, it's just a really, better idea to say, okay, I can be productive in the morning of the day, or I won't take any meetings until it's 10 a.m. or something like this, and I can be really focused, or I don't even check my emails until then. And if that doesn't work, really block out your time. I mean, literally put in a block in your calendar, something like focus time. And if folks don't appreciate that, then just invent some name like urgent meeting or whatever, in order to say, no, I don't have time. And make no mistake, this is the most important time as a developer you get. So don't feel bad about doing this, about saying no to a meeting. When you say, okay, I really need to get this done because that's what you paid to do. So get some focus time and also get some uninterrupted longer focus time. So own your time. You can set basically some events into your calendar, and this is really important. In the same way, it really makes sense to say, well, plan your day a little bit ahead, especially just in the day before, in the evening before. This really makes sense if you say, and it doesn't have to be, super fancy. If you say, well, whatever, something like to-dos text, right? Doesn't have to be any fancy to-dos application. You can say, well, what would I like to do tomorrow? So you can have some syntax here, like implement this feature, or fix this bug, and things like that. And once you're done, then also my recommendation, keep a done list, or you can have some whatever ASCII art here. And this can be super easy. Why? Because then if you say, well, I do this, I have this in a super simple file, and then the next day, once tomorrow comes, you plan this, on the evening before, and then you say, okay, what are the things that I need to do first? You sort them by priority, and then, this is what you do first, and you, will continue with what you ended up today. You will just be, much faster starting off. And also you keep a done list. So that means if at the end of the month, a manager comes and tells you, hey, Sebastian, what actually did you do in this month? And then you can say, well, I did these things. So, it can be super, super simple. Doesn't have to be a super fancy solution. Of course, for myself to be a little bit more productive here, I came up with my own fancy solution. It's called Day Captain. It's actually online. You can try this out yourself, which has, of course, Vim key bindings. So if I say implement feature this 1, 2, 3, so I can change things and I can arrange things to my calendar, because there was no such tool available. So I wrote one for myself, and you can try this out. So it's available. Basically, what I wanted is to have this combination of a task list and a calendar. It's like the same if I would take this task and pull it into the timeline here, and then I can move it around. I can make it bigger, shorter. So it's basically always what I wanted. Some something like a Google Calendar, but with a proper Vim keyboard integration. So you can check this out, daycaptain.com, which I'm just using now all the time in order to do these things and to implement my task and basically doing that. Because it's the same with using your favorite editor. Once you do these things and you're really fast with navigating around here, then of course it's just much easier to handle. And then by doing this, it's also easier to own your time. So this also has, of course, a Google Calendar integration. So you can sync these things, and then your time will be blocked, and you can continue with the most important thing, that is coding Java. So own your time is really an important point for being productive in general. Okay, so before we move on, is there another thing in the chat? Because we're running a little bit short on time, but I was told I can use almost a full hour, so that's fine. What also helps me is write plain text into source, which causes compilation errors. Yes, I do this as well. When you get back, you see the compiler errors and immediately know when you jumped ship 3 days ago. Yes, that's also what I do sometimes. So basically what this means is as follows. I say, I put in something here, usually even my name or something like that, because it's not a reserved keyboard word. And then if I say, the next day, if you would like to build your project, it doesn't compile. And then you see, okay, this is where you left off. So this, or sometimes I use this structure, that's also will be a failure in all programming languages. And that's also a good point in order to continue. But if you need a little bit more complex things, if you need a more complex pointers where to continue, or some pointers to documentation, then of course having some sort of tool there as well. Adding a to-do to make it easier to find these comments as well. Yes, that might help. But the point here is that you have a compilation error. So if you say continue here, then of course a to-do will be ignored easily because it still would build. So this really forces you to continue here. But yeah, of course, you get your point. If you have your own structure, then you can have some more context and some more documentation sort of here. Okay, so that's that. And then, of course, another principle is basically, well, keep learning, or also known as know what you're doing, like really know your craft. And this is also a very important topic, obviously, because the more we know what we're doing, in fact, the more productive we will be. And this is not a joke. I mean, if you read a documentation of a complex tool, you will be so much more effective than just, trying it out yourself and failing and trying again and failing. I mean, we've all done that. We've all been there. But if you just really take the time, sometimes just 15 minutes, to properly read the documentation, understand what this is about, you will be much more productive. And that is just, well, an important point, obviously, as well. And connected to that is also the point of, sharing the knowledge, like not just learn for yourself, but trying to share it. And sharing can be in all sorts of forms. That can be as simple as, creating some documentation. It can be, writing a blog post about it, writing a tweet about it, create a video, give a presentation, whatever that means, creating a podcast. Because sharing knowledge will help you a lot. Teaching is one of the best ways of learning, and you will force yourself to improve that knowledge. So any sort of, knowledge sharing, and that's how I started my own blog, by just basically having pointers for myself, what I learned that day. And it also helped me in the past as well, because I keep searching for my own blog posts, which is really, really funny as well. But just this will make you more productive. And it's really an important thing to do here as well. And also, quite interestingly, once in a while, take a step back and reflect. Basically, reflect what you're doing all the time, and you will find a lot of interesting things. So, for example, automation or potential for automation, things that could be done better, or you notice things in your day when you're most productive, or if you don't have a heavy lunch, then you're more productive in the afternoon, or if you take a long walk, having a longer lunch break, then you will be more productive as well, or whatever that means. Allowing yourself to take a step back and reflect will just also improve you more. You will learn a lot of things that you can do better, and that's also an important thing. And lastly, continuously improve. And this is really something that goes down to all of these points, basically, because any automation you write is some sort of continuous improvement. Any shortcut you learn that then you can use in the future, any documentation you write, of course, any programming language or framework or technology you learn is also an investment. So think of all of these things as long-term investments. It's the same as learning Vim, and then at some point in the beginning you won't be as fast, but at some point you can be really productive. So that's really how I see this. But the fact that you're watching this conference is also one of the best results there, because obviously you are interested in this topic, and that's really amazing. So congratulations for just watching this talk and watching this conference in general, and just this idea of saying, well, I would like to somewhat improve what I do as a developer, is of course making you more productive, but also makes the whole thing more fun. That's really what I believe there. So let's have one more look into the chat here. And with this, I also want to say, well, first of all, already thanks for all of your attention here. And then also you will find these pointers that I promised. So especially the first one here is this course that I mentioned that you can check out, especially if you found the session helpful. So that's more than 14 hours of content there. So check this out. But I also have stuff available that I share on my channels, my YouTube channel. I do a lot of things there, especially lately. Well, my Twitter and podcast available. So also on my blog, you will find some productivity tagged posts. So, just drop by and see what you have there. Also, if you have any of these topics that you see me writing or talking about, where you say this could be helpful for your team or a team of developers or for yourself, then always please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to support you there with some consultation or something similar. And yes, with this, I hope that was helpful. And well, thanks a lot for joining in. We have a question in the chat. LinkedIn, yeah, just search for my name. I also have a LinkedIn there, of course, Sebastian Deschner. You probably find me in the picture there, or text me in some other channels and we can connect there. So yes, thanks a lot for joining in, and I hope you found this helpful. So do we have our moderator here?
Otherwise, yes, we do. Thank you, Sebastian, very much for your talk. I see my camera is misbehaving, but you know what I look like already. Yes. I liked it a lot. I'm probably going to slow down and pause some of the elements in the stream after it's on YouTube. So thank you very much for taking the time, and have a great week. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.